Okay, let's dive right into this explainer today because we are looking at something truly mind-bending. We're going to see exactly how elite, massively overpowered warriors survive when their apocalyptic battlefield suddenly, without warning, becomes a literal farm. Think about that for a second. We are digging into a wildly fascinating segment of the Dreamweaver universe today, specifically zoning in on level 4 of a completely grueling, brutal training simulation. I want you to picture this. You are an elite Dream Knight. You are armed to the teeth. You've got incredible magic. You are fully prepped and ready to take on world-ending, apocalyptic evils. And then, the system just stops you. It literally tells you to put down your legendary weapon, walk over to the dirt, and pick up a hoe. That is exactly what happens in the Union of the Worlds storyline. Our characters are thrust into the Taurus level, which is also known as the Planting Schemes phase, or the PSP. And today, we are going to unpack the absolute genius of this world building. We're going to look at the deeply punishing survival mechanics, and most importantly, the underlying philosophy that forces these powerhouse characters to completely ditch their magic swords and rely entirely on real-world agricultural science.
So we kick things off with this incredibly sinister system notification from Kieran's dad. This is the exact moment that forcibly rips the characters out of their high-stakes combat mindset and violently shoves them into old-school, grinded-out survival mechanics. The notification actually starts by congratulating them on surviving the previous subsistence farming phase, which is a nice touch, right? But then it just drops this bombshell quote on them. Kieran's dad, who, by the way, is the architect of this entire torturous trial, delivers this line with this sinister, mocking laugh, declaring that it is time to go, quote-unquote, old school. Now, Concordia's immediate, visceral reaction to this is to straight up call Kieran's dad a demon, and honestly, can you blame her? But Kieran, he actually gets it. He understands the cold, hard logic here. He points out that it takes a demon to beat a demon. You literally cannot fight a massive, overarching battle without fundamentally understanding your opponent's style and base of operations. So this quote we're looking at, it isn't just some villainous taunt. It is a massive, foundational shift in the entire rules of engagement for this universe. They are no longer just fighting monsters, they are cultivating life.
And this is where it gets so deeply fascinating, because it forces us to ask a really tough question. How on earth do these characters adapt their intense combat prowess to manage their HP and MP without suffering absolutely debilitating stat debuffs? You have to understand, in this specific simulation, the stakes are painfully real. If they don't eat, or worse, if they don't farm correctly, their stats will absolutely plummet. They will wither away. While they wait weeks or months for their crops to literally grow out of the dirt, they are forced to split their party roles. You've got one person meticulously tending the fields, watering, weeding, all of that, while the other is out frantically hunting and gathering just to keep their baseline hit points and magic points from hitting zero. Let's be totally clear here. This is not some cozy, casual farming minigame where you pass the time. This is a high-stakes, life-or-death survival scenario. Poor crop management in this phase equates to a literal physical weakening of their magical and physical capabilities. They have to completely rewire their brains, transitioning from brilliant strategic military minds into absolute masters of agriculture. So, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to hit swords into plowshares, then decode the celestial systems, and take a look at the Taurus system interface. After that, we'll dive into agricultural survival stratagems, adapting to the biome, and wrap it all up with the ultimate survival lesson. Starting right off with Section 1, Swords into Plowshares, and the massive shift to survival. Right, so imagine Kieran opening his status menu, expecting some epic new combat ability, and seeing that their next skill is simply called Taurus. He just lets out this heavy sigh and calls it an armored tank. But he doesn't mean a literal military vehicle. He's talking about the sheer, unyielding, grinding effort that is going to be required to master this phase of the game. He turns to Concordia and reminds her of her core affinities. She is a wielder of earth, which inherently grants immense brute strength, and she's a wielder of wind, which gives her unparalleled precision. Kieran makes this brilliant point that when you combine raw brute force with surgical precision, you have the exact textbook definition of a stratagem. Think about the ancient world for a second. Bulls, the Taurus, they symbolize tremendous, terrifying strength. But how are they used? For the lowliest, most grueling tasks imaginable. They were beasts of burden used for plowing fields and transporting goods, silently providing massive, foundational support for whole civilizations through meat, dairy, and labor. And that is exactly what the Taurus constellation symbolizes in this phase. It's this immense, world-shaping power entirely disguised as a lowly beast of burden, providing tremendous, non-stop life support throughout the planting schemes phase.
Moving into Section 2, Decoding Celestial Systems, where it all comes down to Libra versus Leo.
Okay, so here we have the two massive governing systems that our players absolutely must balance if they want to survive. On one hand, you have the Libra system. Libra is all about direct, unavoidable consequence. Every single action you take has an equal implication. It is the purest original definition of justice. You reap exactly what you sow, literally and figuratively. But Kieran points out a really crucial exception to this harsh role: the state of a person's heart. Sometimes an action is performed with genuinely good intent, but it brings about disastrous results just because of bad timing or some kind of weird misunderstanding. In those cases, the person performing the action isn't actually guilty of malice, and that is where a subconscious counterbalance kicks in. That safety net, that is the Leo system. Concordia summarizes this dynamic so perfectly. She says that a graceful dancer never truly falls, and even when they do appear to stumble, it's most likely just part of their incredibly complex dance. It's that feline grace, the reason cats always land on their feet. So the players can't just hack and slash. They have to actively use both of these celestial systems to constantly weigh and balance every single agricultural action they take.
All right, Section 3, the Taurus System Interface, and learning how to read the environment. Now, when they finally open up this Taurus menu, they are greeted by a UI that looks more like a scientific dashboard than a game menu. They have to constantly, obsessively monitor these specific affinity readings just to ensure their crops don't immediately die. On one side, you've got the sky image. This is detailing your sunshine intensity, your exact temperature, the humidity levels, and air quality. Then, on the completely opposite side, the ground image is tracking soil water, acidity levels, mineral salt content, nutrients, the presence of pests, and the exact soil types. The narrator has this moment of realization where they understand that these aren't just random stats. These are essentially affinity readings for the entire ecosystem. If these readings are generally high and well-balanced, it means the specific breed of crop they've selected is most likely going to thrive. It's such a brilliant, punishing way to turn real-world agronomy into a highly readable, highly actionable game interface. The characters must constantly evaluate and tweak these numbers before they even think about planting a single solitary seed.
This brings us to Section 4. Agricultural survival stratagems, or basically hacking the farm.
It is honestly incredible to see how Kieran and Concordia actually use real-world, highly verified crop rotation science to completely hack these game survival mechanics. They aren't just out there blindly throwing seeds into the dirt hoping for the best. They are formulating intensely complex, multi-seasonal plans to maximize their crop yield and absolutely avoid those dreaded stat debuffs we talked about earlier. Kieran is super strict about this. He insists on using organic substitutes, things like animal dung and fallen leaves, to fertilize the soil. Why? Because using inorganic fertilizers in this system without absolute laser-precise quantity control will actually inflict massive long-term stat debuffs on their characters. And notice how they specifically, strategically rely on leguminous crops in Step 2. This is real science here, folks. In the real world, legumes literally deposit traces of nitrogen into the soil through their root systems, which acts as a completely natural, highly toxic repellent to most soil pests. He even takes it a step further. Kieran uses the Leo system we discussed to hunt for quote-unquote helpful organisms that live miles and miles below ground level, organisms that provide indirect support to the soil quality. It just proves how deeply, on a microscopic level, they are strategizing to win this phase. Meanwhile, we have to look at what the other team is doing. The narrator and Ciela utilize their specific biome to mathematically align their harvest times, building massive storage facilities while their crops basically grow indefinitely. Over in the tropics, their environment demands a totally different strategy. The narrator is out there meticulously measuring the seeds of both the Libra and Taurus systems, and then utilizing the Leo system to calculate the exact average period between planting and harvesting. By mathematically aligning these complex growth periods, they completely optimize when their food is ready. Because they spawn near the equator, they have a massive advantage. They don't have to worry about surviving harsh, unfavorable seasons like winter. So they focus heavily on perennial crops. These are crops that can bear fruit almost indefinitely once they mature. But it takes a long time for perennials to yield that first harvest. So while they wait, they rapidly plant annuals and biennials to fill the food gap, all while constructing these huge, robust storage facilities to hoard their eventual surplus. It is just brilliant resource management. On to Section 5. Adapting to the biome and surviving the brutal coast. So the tropics sound great, right? But what if your spawn location just gives you absolutely terrible agricultural stats?
Not everyone gets dropped into a lush tropical jungle or a beautifully balanced temperate zone. Arlene and Mitsuki got the short end of the stick. They spawned on highly infertile, completely unforgiving coastal land. But they adapt brilliantly. They use gravity magic to literally distill seawater, and they rely on a high-protein animal diet, while slowly, painstakingly fertilizing the land via irrigation. Let's break that down because it's so cool. Mitsuki uses her magical ability to manipulate gravity and gravitational zones to create a makeshift high-pressure distillation device. This literally rips the fresh drinking water right out of the salty seawater. And they don't waste a thing. They save all that leftover salt. They use that exact salt, along with the harsh sun, to sun-dry and preserve any meat they manage to hunt. Because their coastal land is basically dead and infertile, they can't rely on crops early on. They focus on an animal-based diet to keep their HP up, specifically relying on dairy and eggs from animals they manage to corral and rear in the few tiny fertile pockets of land they can find. And to fix their dead land, they physically build irrigation channels stretching kilometers inland, slowly, drop by drop, transforming the dry, dead riverbeds into fertile soil over time. They even use Mitsuki's gravitational flight to safely map out the entire continent from the sky, looking for better zones. It's an absolute masterclass in using your specific character's unique skills to just brute force a harsh, unlivable environment into a habitable one.
And now, Section 6, the ultimate survival lesson, thriving behind enemy lines. This brings us to the absolute core realization of this whole explainer. Why are they doing this? Why did Kieran's dad force these elite, god-tier warriors who are actively preparing to face an evil that has been planning a literal apocalypse since the dawn of time to start from history's day one and grow beans? Concordia rightly points out that the military higher-ups already have all their combat data. I mean, they even assigned her to the massive border wall specifically because they know how devastating her wide-range magical attacks are. So why this brutal, grinding farming phase? Well, this grueling phase was explicitly designed to teach them a hard truth. Your combat prowess means absolutely nothing if you cannot survive in total isolation. If you get stuck behind enemy lines and you are entirely dependent on finding a shop or using enemy currency or waiting for allied supply lines to reach you, you will die. It doesn't matter how unbelievably good you are with a sword. This entire simulation is a trial designed to forcefully teach them how to convert their abstract combat prowess into highly practical, foundational survival skills. It's all about absolute, unshakable independence. The emphasis in this game isn't placed on finding some glowing key item at the bottom of a dungeon. It's placed entirely on developing key skill in your mind that no one can ever take away from you. And that is perfectly encapsulated when Kieran delivers this incredibly profound piece of wisdom, completely justifying the torture of this entire farming phase. He says, "A person with amazing skill and no possessions can survive anywhere." Think about that. If you rely entirely on the legendary +10 magical sword you found in a chest, what happens when it breaks? What happens when you are captured and your inventory is wiped completely clean? A person who only has items loses everything in that moment. They are completely defenseless. But a person who inherently understands the science of crop rotation, a person who knows exactly how to distill fresh water from the ocean using gravity, a person who can perfectly read the Taurus system's soil acidity levels just by looking at the dirt, that person has amazing skill. They might have 0 possessions to their name, they might be wearing rags, but they can survive anywhere, under absolutely any condition. That is how you defeat an ancient apocalyptic evil, not by having the biggest gun, but by being absolutely, fundamentally unkillable through sheer adaptability and knowledge. And so as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this provocative thought, and I want you to apply it to your own life. Are you relying on possessions, or are you actively building undeniable internal skills? The planting schemes phase forces these fictional characters to look at their own inventories, but it forces us to do the same. In our modern, hyper-connected world, it is so incredibly easy to rely entirely on the massive systems built around us. We rely on the grocery stores being stocked, we rely on the complex global supply chains, we rely on the technology in our pockets just to navigate our own cities. But if all of that were suddenly stripped away tomorrow, if you were metaphorically dropped into level 4 and had to hammer your own swords into plowshares, would you actually have the foundational skills to sustain yourself and your family? It's a deeply fascinating, kind of terrifying question that makes the incredible world of Dreamweaver so much more than just another fantasy battle simulator. It holds a mirror up to our own reliance on stuff over skill. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into agricultural stratagems. Stay curious, keep building those practical, real-world skills, and I will absolutely catch you in the next explainer.